It's done. You may start now.
Okay, thank you. Hello, welcome and good evening, everyone. My name is Satvik Varma, and I am delighted to be your host this evening for the first of its kind event on mental health and well being. We've deliberately decided to name our webinar today Briefless Does Not Equal to Hope. We have an amazing set of panelists here, all of whom very, very readily agreed to speak at this event. And I just wish that it was in better circumstances that we had all assembled here just to lay the groundwork for this webinar. In the last 10 days, we've read and heard about several young lawyers in the legal fraternity who were not able to cope with the emotional, mental, and economical challenges posed by the pandemic. And as a consequence of this, these young lawyers, I don't like to say committed suicide, but they took their life or they succumbed. And as the doctor will probably tell us, I'm sure there's a better phrase for it. But that's what compelled us to, and some of my friends and colleagues, to start thinking about this. And so we put together this webinar today. Unlike any other discussion, our objective here is not to try and delve too much into the past, but to try and hear from a real life example of an honorable judge, to hear from a trained doctor on what is the way out, and to hear from two young lawyers who have actually been going through these emotional and mental well-being challenges and who have been so gracious enough to talk about their struggles on a platform so that they can help their colleagues. So without further ado, I'd like to introduce my panelists and then get straight into this discussion. I'm absolutely delighted to have Honorable Justice Mr. Manmohan with us. A lot of my friends were asking me on why I chose Justice Manmohan. And I think I would be lying if I say it wasn't because he's from Modern. He did history honors at Hindu and Campus Law Center, all three places where I sort of dovetailed him many, many years later. And if I can achieve half the success that he has in his professional career, that'll be phenomenal. But it's also because of the softer aspects of Justice Manmohan. Some years ago, Justice Manmohan delivered a landmark judgment, which is famously known as the Muhammad Ahmad judgment, where he held that health is a fundamental right which has in it the prerequisites of social justice and equality. And I see no reason why, although perhaps not in his mind at the time, because the mental health legislation came after that, on why that doesn't extend also to mental health. He's been very, very kind to spare his time this evening after a full day at work, and I thank him for readily agreeing. Thank you, sir. We're delighted to have you. We also have with us an expert in the field from mental health and well-being, Dr. Arvinder J Singh. She has over 25 years of experience as being a psychologist and a psychotherapist trained in the UK. She's the founder director of the Ashoka Center for Wellbeing. I've actually been quite taken by the fact that she's a guest lecturer at IIM Ahmedabad and has worked for several years, or in particular with women in conflict in Kashmir and Gujarat. Thank you, Doc. We really look forward to some practical advice from you. We have with us Gaurav Kumar, who's joined in from Bijnor. Gaurav is a first generation young lawyer, 28 years old, graduated in 2016. Gaurav is one of the lawyers who was featured in a recent Indian Express story about the lawyers who, owing to financial hardships, have gone back to their native places because of the inability to meet their ends in Delhi. Gaurav practices primarily on the criminal and matrimonial side, and I am absolutely delighted that Gaurav agreed to join us. He's currently in Bijnor and was celebrating Tej with his family yesterday. There's a big festival in UP, as he mentioned. We also have with us Surya Rajappan, who I'm absolutely thrilled has chosen to help us all. Surya is again a first generation young lawyer. She asked me to describe her as a first generation young lawyer trying to navigate through life and the legal profession. Um, Surya is also been very, very courageous and bold. She's someone who has been confronted with mental health issues for the past several years. It's not all related to her choice of law as a profession, but the profession has definitely accentuated her anxiety and her mental health. And she is currently seeking help and medication for it. And she's been absolutely remarkable and courageous to talk about this and share with our audience today her challenges, her struggles, and what she thinks can be takeaways. So, without further ado, thank you so much. I thought I'll start with the Honorable Judge. Sir, you're also a first generation lawyer. And, you know, I say this knowing fairly well that, you know, as your during your career as a lawyer, you were really at the top of the game. You did all the big cases. You've handled work all across the spectrum. What were some of your experiences starting off as a young lawyer? And what were some of the challenges that you were confronted with? If you could perhaps share your own experience to start us off, sir.
Yeah, good evening to all. Thank you, Satvik, for having me over. In fact, I'll narrate to you an interesting incident. When I was studying law, I was staying in a hostel. And whenever my parents used to come to town, I used to be treated for a meal at the IIC. On one such occasion, Chief Justice Hidayatullah happened to be sitting on the adjoining table. My father introduced me to him. He had just retired as the Vice President of India. And he told him that I was studying law. And I was in those days staying at Guar Hall. So Chief Justice Hidayatullah immediately said, "Young man, do you know there are 4 stages in the legal profession?" So I did not know about them. So I looked a bit surprised. And he said, "You know, the first stage is when there is no work, no pay. Second stage is some work, no pay. Third stage is a lot of work and some pay. Fourth stage is no work and all pay." And he laughed heartily and he told me, "I'm enjoying my life. I'm in my last phase." And when we joined the profession, the standard norm was that for 6 months, no senior or no law firm would pay you any stipend or any fees. So our generation knew from day one that it's going to be a long and tedious journey, something akin to climbing a mountain. We knew that during this journey, there'll be good days, there'll be bad days. One will have to meander his ways through the obstacles. And as a consequence, those who continued in the profession had a survival instinct and a long-term commitment. And I think that was the crucial fact. We had a short lull phases in our career, but we carried on. In those days, there was not so much of money in the initial phase. We were much more emotionally connected with our colleagues, friends, and seniors. In fact, I must share with you a secret that my most remunerative and most lucrative briefs came from my friends who were my contemporaries, who worked with me in the law firm or in the chamber, and my previous seniors with whom I worked with. So this was sort of an emotional connect we had. And we were also not scared of asking for help. We never felt shy in asking for help. In fact, whenever I travel abroad, I'm very fond of walking in the city center. And I like finding out from anyone who's walking on the road the directions. And when my daughter is with me, she's she's ashamed of me, saying, "Why do you ask for directions? We got Google with us. Why do you need it?" But that's the way I've been brought up. I like to interact. I like to find out. I don't trust the gadget so much. So our times were different. And really the profession changed somewhere in the mid-90s when there was an economic boom which took place because of the opening up of the economy. And just around this time, the national law schools came along, and the new entrants who joined the profession, I think, moved to the third stage immediately, which is Justice Hidayatullah mentioned. A lot of work and some pay. And they never went through an actual struggle or financial hardship phase that we went through. We have seen a lot of hard times to begin with, but we had patience. This new generation is extremely intelligent, extremely sharp, extremely sensitive. But patience is something which I think is slightly on the lower side. And these people believe in a little short-term relationship or commitment. And I'm sure Dr. Singh will enlighten us more, but things that I have read shows that the youngsters, they suffer from this endorphins rush, a hormone that gives you great pleasure and excitement. So our generation was slightly different. And we used to reflect a lot during our lull phases. I don't know whether the new generation reflects that, because they have been leading a very fast-paced life. They work hard, they party hard. In our times, it was not such a hectic life. And we were more connected with our surroundings. Today, I find that a communication revolution has taken place. People sitting on the dining table can communicate with someone living thousands of miles away, but they may not be able to communicate with a person who's sitting next to them on the adjoining chair. So there is a slight amount of distinction today, but struggle has always been there, will always be there. We have all gone through struggles, but yes, this sort of phase I have not seen before, where there's a total shutdown of economic activity, where people are not stepping out of their homes. This is very, very unusual. And I think the people who are in the profession, like any other person in the society, is deeply hurt by what is taking place. It's taking a toll emotionally, physically, economically. And I think everyone deserves empathy at this juncture. And especially the youngsters who've been in the profession for less than 10 years, it must have hit them really very hard because of the rents, the paraphernalia that you have, the clerks, stenos that you maintain, the offices. So these are hard times, undoubtedly, something which has not been seen by our generation. But struggle was always there. And this profession is about dealing with a jealous mistress. In fact, I've seen various phases. When I used to work with a senior, we were doing a constitution bench matter and we had not slept for 10 days because that constitution bench was going on. And when it got over at about 2:30, I told my senior, I'm going home, I need some sleep. He said, yeah, go ahead. Suddenly the clerk whispered in my ear, no, the other matter you were working with, your senior has also reached and our turn has come. And I was working from court 5 to court 7 in those days, which was on the rare side. Literally, I had tears in my eyes. And my senior saw my face and said, she's a jealous mistress. And I said, I was wondering whom he talking about. And then I realized he's talking about the goddess of law. So we have seen those phases, busy times and lull phases. Lull phases like when you're on your own, you've had a restful weekend and you've gone for a matter on Monday morning and you're over with it at 10:45 and you have nothing else. And you're full of energy at that stage. So you've gone through those phases, but the profession is such a beautiful profession that you have to plan And when you get the opportunity, you have to strike. In those lull phases, you have to plan for the future. You have to adapt yourself to the future. And when you get the opportunity of work, how are you going to utilize it? That is crucial. And I think that is really where the planning must take place.
Thank you, sir. That's very heartening, and I think that's a great opening. I'd actually thought that I'd go to Doc before this, but since you've given me the cue, I'm going to jump first and come to Gaurav if Dr. Singh will allow me that luxury. Gaurav, a lot of what the honorable judge just mentioned must resonate with you. You must be able to relate with it. You know, here's a first generation lawyer who's on record in a story covered by the Indian Express to have shared that he had a monthly expense of 12,000 rupees. And because of the day-to-day hearings in Saket court having stopped, he's gone back to Bijnor. Gaurav incidentally also, unfortunately rather, lost his father in January this year and has the obligation to get his sister married. So Gaurav, would you please share with us some of your story and you know, आप हमारे साथ अपनी भावनाओं का प्रकट करें, आप हमें बताएं कि आपका मानसिक संतुलन पे क्या प्रभाव पड़ा इस महामारी से या इस जो प्रोफेशन की चैलेंजेस हैं और जो रोजमर्रे की आपकी परेशानियां थी उनसे आप कैसे झेलते हैं. आपने जज साहब की बात सुनी कि इस प्रोफेशन में हमें आगे बढ़ने के लिए संकल्प, दृढ़ निष्ठा और मेहनत करनी पड़ती है, पर आपका इसमें क्या एक्सपीरियंस रहा है फर्स्ट हैंड?
First of all, sir, very good evening, Honorable Mr. Justice Manmohan, sir. Hello.
आवाज नहीं आ रही गौरव जी. गौरव
सर
थोड़ा जोर से बोलिए.
हेलो.
हाँ, अब आ रही है जी.
Yeah, sir. First of all, I want to pay thanks to all of you, sir, and very good evening to Honorable Mr. Justice Manmohan, sir, and Madam Arvinder Singh, Madam ji, and Satvik, sir, you too, and all other my colleagues. Sir, I would like to say that this is very initial phase of my career. सर मेरा 2016 में मेरा एनरोलमेंट बीसीडी में मैंने किया था. तो उसके बाद सर दिल्ली में तो मेरा कोई उस समय तो कोई जानने वाला भी नहीं होता था. तो दिल्ली में जाके मैं तब कोई मेरे रिलेटिव थे, मेरी मौसी जी वहाँ पे रहती थी, तो उनके पास मैंने जाके रहना शुरू किया. सर उसके बाद मैंने धीरे धीरे अपने आप को सर वहाँ पे कोई जानने वाला भी नहीं था, कुछ वो नहीं होता था. तो धीरे धीरे मैं वहाँ पे इंटर्नशिप मैंने शुरू में की है. दिल्ली हाई कोर्ट में एक रवि भूषण करके सर होते थे उस समय, तो उनके साथ में इंटर्नशिप कर रहा था. सर उसके बाद फिर धीरे धीरे मैं ट्रायल कोर्ट में एक वाई सिंह एंड एसोसिएट करके एक सर हैं, वो उनकी एसोसिएशन है, उनके साथ में सर लग गया सर. तो अभी सर 2-2.5 साल से मैं उन्हीं के साथ में वर्क कर रहा था. तो जैसे तैसे धीरे धीरे थोड़ा सा डेवलपमेंट सर होना शुरू हुआ था. बट जैसे अब ये सब पेंडेमिक के इस दौर में सर सभी थोड़े से परेशान हैं. तो मेरे साथ वो एक कैजुअलिटी सर बीच में भी हो गई थी कि माय फादर हैज़ पास्ड अवे इन लास्ट ईयर इन अ रोड एक्सीडेंट. तो सर उसके बाद थोड़ी सी रिस्पॉन्सिबिलिटीज़ भी थी सर. तो उसके चलते जब ये सर अचानक से इस तरह का मुझे को फेस करना हुआ, तो मैं थोड़ा सा सर डिप्रेस्ड हो गया था फॉर द टाइम बिंग. बट मैंने अपने आप को सर संभाला उस दौर में. आई स्टे स्ट्रॉन्ग फॉर माई फैमिली, फॉर माई करियर एंड अदर्स. तो अभी सर इस समय भी थोड़ा सा यही सब चल रहा है. कभी फेसेस फ्लक्चुएशंस हैं सर लाइफ में. सोचना
तो
थोड़ा सा.
ये डिप्रेशन हुई गौरव, आपको कैसे आइडेंटिफाई किया कि आप ये डिप्रेशन है और आपने क्या मदद मांगी? क्योंकि इस जो एक चीज हमें सुनने में आती है जिसपे मैं डॉक्टर साहब को तवज्जो दूंगा उनकी बात का और उनसे कहूंगा इस पे वो इलेबोरेट करें, वो ये है कि कोई भी इस डिप्रेशन को या इस एंजाइटी को या मेंटल इलनेस को आइडेंटिफाई कर नहीं चाहता. वो कहते हैं भाई मेरी मर्दांगनी खराब होगी अगर मैं कहूंगा. तो आपने कैसे इसको आइडेंटिफाई किया और कैसे आपको लगा कि आपको मदद की जरूरत है और क्या किया आपने किसका सहारा लिया?
Sir, I am a kind of person, very socially type of person, sir, I am. And I used to work in ABVP and I was my district president at that time in my college days. तो सर लेकिन इस समय क्योंकि सर एज अ सोशल वर्कर सर मुझे बड़ा अपने फ्रेंड से बात करना, लोगों से मिलना, मीटिंग्स करना, वो सब मुझे बड़ा अच्छा लगता था। लेकिन अभी सब जब ये सब चलना शुरू हुआ तो मुझे अकेला रहना बड़ा, मतलब अकेला रहने में अच्छा लगने लगा, किसी से बात करना अच्छा नहीं लगता लगता था सर इस दौर में। तो थोड़ा सा परेशान रहने लगा, वो थोड़ा सा इंसोमिनिया भी मेरे को फेस करना पड़ा सर, वो रात को नींद वींद में तो कई बार दिक्कत हो जाती। तो सर ये सब जब चलता रहा तो, लेकिन मैंने किसी के साथ सर ये सब शेयर नहीं किया है बीच में, तो मैं खुद से ही अपने आप को सर ओवरकम करता रहा। तो एक्चुअली मैं सर थोड़ा सा मेडिटेशन प्रैक्टिसेस भी करता हूँ, तो मैं कई बार मेडिटेशन वगैरह की प्रैक्टिसेस करता रहा हूँ, तो इस तरह से अपने आप को सेल्फ कम डाउन कर लेता था। तो अभी सर अभी भी ऐसा ही लगता है कि अभी भी यही सब चल ही रहा है। तो कहीं न कहीं थोड़ा-सा मैं स्पिरिचुअली थोड़ा-सा अभी थोड़ा और मोल्ड हो गया हूँ उस तरफ, इस दौर में सर। बाकी जो अपना घर पे स्टडी वगैरह करने का होता है वो थोड़ा ऑफ कर दिया है। बाकी आई एम जस्ट वाचिंग दिस सिचुएशन व्हाट इज़ गोइंग ऑन दिस टाइम।
No, very
यस
good.
सर।
And I think that's, thank you, Gaurav. Doc, if I may bring you in, I think with your kind of experience of over 25 years working with women in conflict areas of Kashmir, Gujarat, across the country, talking about this, setting up your helplines, what do you feel is the greatest barrier? As the Honorable Judge mentioned, the law is a jealous mistress. The law does require each one of us to put in long, strenuous hours. I think, regardless of where you are in the profession, in whether it's in phase 4, yes, I think there's little work, but there's someone or down the cycle in the value chain who's really putting in those 14, 15 hours, and there's no substitute to hard work. But in your experience, A, professionally, but B, just personally, what are the immediate challenges and hurdles to youngsters even seeking out help and identifying that they need help? If I was to rephrase my question, what could we as a fraternity do? The Bar Association, the judiciary, the bar and bench, what could we do to have helped save those 4 valuable lives that we've lost in the last 10 days?
Before I get to what we could have done, or what all of you could have done for people around you, I think it's important for us to really hone in that the problem of mental health, of poor mental health, could happen to any one of us. So the first thing is to remove the stigma from there and actually start accepting. Like I was quite intrigued and touched at the same time when Gaurav shared that मैं अपने आप से ही deal करता रहा. That's what it is. When we have a physical injury, we immediately go to a doctor. We say, ha, there is something I need to attend to. Because there's a social permission, sanction, there's no stigma for it. But whereas anything to do with a mental health issue, the word mental evokes a certain kind of response in each one of us. So people view the word mental as, crazy, pagal, and so on and so forth. So it's not really seen as a part of, your well-being or health, even though WHO has put that in their definition and so on and so forth. But at an internal level, we haven't quite accepted that. So I think the first thing is that also what we could have done, it gets answered in that. I think one, to be able to accept that just like when there is a physical injury, we need a doctor, a surgeon, an orthoped, or whatever. When there is something to do with our emotions, our psychological well-being, we need to seek help. That help could be counseling. That help could be at a very basic level, just talking to someone who you trust and feel is not judgmental and is going to keep your matters confidential and not really like advise you, but give you that space. Because when you're in trouble, the one thing you need is someone to hold that space for you, to contain that emotion for you. And that necessarily does not have to be a professional. I could be axing my profession saying that, but actually at the first level, at the first aid level, you just need a compassionate, empathetic human being who just sort of listens to your story without interrupting, without judging. Once that happens, intrinsically, each one of us has that ability to get back to the objective space. So, in the space of what we could do for people around us, so it's like whenever anybody says, I was just reading somewhere that when there's when you're depressed, People say, hey, just shake it off. It's all in your head. You have a broken leg. Nobody tells you, hey, shake it off. It's all in your leg. So, so let's just start accepting, listening, not looking at the person as somebody who's weak. Actually, your vulnerability is your strength. Brené Brown very beautifully describes that. And the moment, when you're vulnerable, you know that you have the strength to accept that you're human. And look at the challenges that a young lawyer, you just described, between the three of you, you just described. And I'm sure Surya will have more stories of not only being a lawyer, but also being a woman. How that compounds the issues sometimes. But if there are all these problems, the least we can do is just listen to someone's story. If somebody around us, so first is that, identify signs and symptoms. Gaurav gave very telltale signs and symptoms. Insomnia, sleep was disturbed, didn't feel like working, losing focus, having, appetite. Satvik, you're saying something, but you're on mute.
Sorry, I was saying, I was saying, and he said he's very social, but he started staying alone and isolating himself.
Isolating yourself, social isolation. The fact that if you're somebody who's very fond of dressing, you're moving away from that. Maybe, you start having this kind of abnormal fascination with death and dying. You start talking about things, you start giving away your things. These are all telltale signs that, you're in a space which is high risk, which needs help in containing. So if somebody does that, now mostly, we're very uncomfortable. So we just back off. We say, hey, don't be silly. Don't talk like that. That's not how it is. Oh, shut up. You're not upset. You're not depressed. You're the life of a party. So we dismiss people's emotions. If somebody expresses something, the first thing is to just listen. You don't want to say anything. You don't know what to say. Doesn't matter. Just your presence, your kind, compassionate presence and your look in the eye is enough to help the person calm down and ventilate. And we all know that ventilate takes care. It's the first aid. And then you can encourage the person to seek help. Now there is, due to the pandemic, we have a lot of helplines also that are running. At some point, I'll ask Satvik to share those.
I want to just, Surya, I was going to come to you, but if you'll allow me, taking cue from the doctor said, I just want to go back to the honorable judge, because she said, talking about Surya, we're talking about stories. So Surya, I'll come back to you in just 1 minute. Sir, one of the very interesting things about stories, as Dr. Arvinder mentioned, was that I had read some time ago, and that's one of the things I want to do during this period, is to read MC Setalvad's autobiography, My Life. It's the one book that every young lawyer should read. It's fairly voluminous. And MC Setalvad shared his own story, sir, that he cooled his heels in his father's chamber for over 10 years. And we know that, success followed him thereafter. In your experience, sir, and in the story that, you would like to narrate, there is this confidence positivity cycle. There's your metric of success is measured by the number of briefs you have, which is why we decided we'll call this webinar Briefless is not equal to hopeless. But sir, how is it for a youngster, to break that cycle? Because I think the pandemic has only worsened some of the crisis that some of these youngsters face on a day-to-day basis within the profession. So I wondered if you had any thoughts on that or could share from your own experience, please.
Satvik, the most negative word of 2020 is positive.
That's true, sir. That's true.
Okay, coming back to the topic, in my view, briefless is not equivalent to hopeless. Briefless phase is a temporary phase. Hopeless means things are beyond redemption. I agree it's a tough phase, especially for the youngsters. They are finding it difficult to meet their ends. But let me tell you, I have seen my father's generation. They have gone through a far tougher phase, which was a partition, where they virtually lost their homes and everything that they possessed. And some people got separated from their families, had to live in refugee camps for years. And look, They all ultimately led a prosperous life. So life can always be rebuilt. You have to survive this phase. You have to adapt to the future. You have to plan for the future. And how you come out of it is by talking to someone, by seeking help. The problem is if you don't seek help, you will not come out of it.
Sure.
They say in alcoholism, I'm not an expert, but what I have read is that you go through 12 phases if you want to come out of alcoholism. The first phase is that you must realize you have a problem. And the last phase is if an alcoholic starts helping another alcoholic, he'll surely come out of his disease.
Sure.
So it's time to help others. It's time to show empathy and to show it openly. And in fact, what I find is that in this society, there is a lot of empathy. In fact, the judgment that you mentioned about Muhammad Ahmad's case,
Yes, sir.
when I started hearing that matter, that's a fascinating matter. Dr. Singh will find it of interest. There was a young boy coming from a economically depressed background, suffering from a rare disease. A rare disease means that you have the treatment for it, but that treatment will never recover the cost that has gone into its evolution because it's going to be used so rarely. It's 5 in a million have that disease. And it's normally the enzyme replacement therapies which have to be given, which are costly treatments, have to be given every month. So when I started hearing the matter, I had to complete the pleadings and go through the due process. And the petitioner's counsel told me this man will not survive till you hear the matter. So I told him, listen, I can't do much because I can't force the state to start subsidizing the treatment without passing a judgment. What I can do is the bar president happens to be here. I can tell him to circulate your appeal in the cause list. If someone contributes, make use of it. And by word of mouth, if it spreads, maybe you'll get some money. And I thought we'll raise money for a month or two. The bar contributed so generously that they even spoke to a doctor. The hospital contributed. In fact, the pharmaceutical company contributed. And ultimately, although I pronounced the judgment in favor of the patient, that patient didn't mean by judgment because he was treated free of cost by the pharmaceutical company that used to manufacture that drug. So there is empathy. The issue is making people aware about it. You have to talk about it. And I feel the state is missing out on a number of opportunities. These are, for instance, this is an occasion where the society needs to rally around one issue, that healthcare is very crucial. It needs to be subsidized by the state, or it needs to be taken care of by the state for the marginalized, for the poor. Because if there is human inequality, it is really shown in healthcare. And as far as mental health care is concerned, that is certainly a new area. But I must say that the Mental Health Care Act of 2017 is a very, very progressive act. The issues that the doctor flagged have actually been taken into account. If I may just read out the preamble of the objective of this act when it was introduced. It says, A, recognizing that persons with mental illness constitute a vulnerable section of the society and are subject to discrimination in our society. The third is persons with mental health should be treated like other persons with health problems, and the environment around them should be made conducive to facilitate recovery, rehabilitation, and full participation in the society. And in order to promote and protect the rights of persons with mental illness during the delivery of healthcare in institutions in the community, this act has been passed. In fact, the act also makes a distinction between an unsound mind and people who are suffering from mental illness. Mental illness has been defined as a substantial disorder of thinking, mood, perception, orientation, or memory that grossly impairs judgment, behavior, capacity to recognize reality, or ability to meet the ordinary demands of life. Mental conditions associated with the abuse of alcohol and drugs, but does not include mental retardation, which is a condition of arrested or incomplete development of mind of a person specially characterized by subnormality of intelligence. There's also a very interesting provision under Section 29(2), which lays a duty on the appropriate government to plan, design, and implement public healthcare programs to reduce suicides and attempted suicides in the country.
Correct.
There is an obligation cast on the state to prepare plans. Unfortunately, this act is not existing at the ground level today. For instance, a matter had come up, and we were looking for the health boards which had to be constituted under the act. Unfortunately, mental health review boards had not been constituted under 73 about 9 months ago. I don't know what is the current position. But this act needs to be implemented at the ground level if people have to be provided succor during this current phase. And I think this act will be a great boon to the public at large. So this really needs to be implemented.
No, and thank you. I think I wasn't aware of the insides of what you shared with us about the Muhammad Ahmad judgment. And you're absolutely right, sir. I think the 2017 Mental Health Act is a very forward-looking legislation. I'm sure everyone's aware, but for those who are not, the Constitution Bench of the Supreme Court in the Navtej Johar case, where homosexuality was decriminalized, has specifically laid down and has emphasized on the right to mental health being a part of the right to health. So, mental health has got focus. But, Surya has been taking copious notes, and I'd like to shift to her really as the star, storyteller of this evening's program. Surya, you've heard the doctor talk about it, and, I'm going to then leave it more as a dialogue and a communication. You've heard what she said. You've heard what what Gaurav said. Words like empathy, seeking help. Tell us a little bit about your own struggles. Tell us a little bit about your journey. Open up for the benefit of those watching. What is the advice that you have for your friends, colleagues, based on your experience? So, allow us that entry into your personal life, if you may. And before you do that, I want to just commend you, applaud you, and really thank you for talking to us, because it really takes a lot of courage, conviction for a young lawyer to come on a public platform and openly share about her struggles and her trials. So thank you for that, Surya. The floor is yours.
Thank you, sir. First of all, I would like to really thank you for this opportunity. I wouldn't have imagined that this would happen during the pandemic. So really thank you for that, and good evening to all the other panelists. So also thank you for your copious encouraging words, so to say. Sir, I have been someone who, I think I've had anxiety issues since I was a child. And I don't think this was ever really, I don't think it's stood out in my mind ever as something that was out of the ordinary. I just thought that this happens to people. And I remember while I was in college, and I studied in DU for 6 years. And I remember every time there was a shift in my life, for example, when I was graduating and I didn't know what the future was, I would get panic attacks, and severe panic attacks where I would not be able to breathe. Once I found a solution to it, like what I was going to do in the future, it would just go away and it would never bother me apart from that. But since I'm someone who likes reading up on things just for the sake of it, I made it a point to read up about anxiety and about mental health in general. And I have been very vocal about my ideas about mental health even before I was diagnosed with depression and anxiety. So I've never had a problem talking about it, because that is what is needed to talk about it. And so, however, in my life, there were certain incidents which triggered the depression and anxiety that I'm talking about. My mom passed away about 2 years ago. I don't think I really dealt with it, even now. So I can't.
Take a moment.
Yeah.
Take a moment. We'll all So you sit
Yes, and
water in that glass next to you?
yes, there
No
is.
in there? Okay.
Yes, I'm good now. I'm really sorry
No.
about that.
That's brave of you.
And then there was, I mean, I don't think I dealt with it even when it happened. And I knew that it was, and he suffered from prolonged illness, which also caused a lot of issues, obviously, at home in general with how our mental well being. Um, but all throughout that time, I think my mom was sick for about 8 to 9 months, and I don't remember taking a day off from work because I really liked working, and that was the only thing that was keeping me sane. And yes, law does provide that, where you can completely shut out everything else and be present in your work, and it will just keep giving you work so that you don't really have to deal with anything. But after a while, about a year or so, there was also a broken engagement, and so things started piling up in my head, so to say, and I could not focus on work. And that was my breaking point because I've never not been able to focus on work. Um, it was the one thing that I could just throw myself into and forget about it. But I couldn't focus on work, and I started making small mistakes. And that's when I realized that I need to stop and think and fix the underlying problem before I can fix the focus issue. So I actually decided to take a sabbatical. And I've actually been privileged that I've had seniors and colleagues who've been extremely supportive and understanding. And the senior that I was working with at the time knew everything about my mom and everything that I was going through. So she was very, very supportive, and she um guided me through that. And when I decided to take a sabbatical, I was comfortable enough to know that I can be on my be without work for a sustained period of time because I had made those arrangements. But I know that not everyone can do that because I mean, we all know that the salaries in the profession, especially in the litigation field, in our in the at least in our years of experience, are extremely low, and um, and some and at least I had the resources to go to a psychologist and to then go to a psychiatrist and seek consultation, pay for medication, and I didn't have to worry about any of those things. But when you pay a young lawyer who has to take care of himself, his family, and other obligations, I don't think there is much left for them to seek out help. And it might not always work for someone, but for me, from my personal experience and speaking from my privilege, I know that going for counseling and seeking help has helped me, but it's not an upward curve all the time. I falter. I've not been taking my medication for some time, but I know that I can get better at least now, because before that, it was pretty hopeless.
And if I may just pick up, and I really want the doctor to address this, but if I may just pick up, how have some of these problems and challenges that you just articulated and were so courageous enough to talk about, um, how have they got accentuated during the pandemic, Surya? How you said you're on a sabbatical, but surrounded around doom and gloom. One of the things that I did for a lot of my colleagues in office is that we made a routine very early into the pandemic, even when we were briefless and had very little work to do, that let's try and make sure that we do one Zoom call a day. We have some sort of a routine. I encouraged everyone that let's try and get on a fitness regime. So there was some semblance of a routine. But I want to ask you, Surya, since we are gathered today at a time of the pandemic, and at a time of the pandemic that has really pushed people off the edge, what has been some of your hardest moments during the pandemic, Surya? And then, maybe the doctor and you can talk about this because I really want to hear from the doctor. I'm sure her number of patients would have gone up during this time. So.
So, I mean, the pandemic has been hard for everyone. And I think the biggest problem is that we can't go outside. And I'm someone who loves being outdoors. I love the open green outdoors. And it really bothers me that I don't have that right now. And I'm in an area where there aren't many parks and I can't go for a walk. So that really affects me because I feel like I'm stuck somewhere. But apart from that, there is also the fact that even though I was on a sabbatical, I mean, I wasn't employed, but I had like a few cases here and there. So I was working on those. And that was enough to keep me occupied and not have me worry about my finances at all. But now that the courts are shut, there is no work. And more than the money, because I'm again privileged enough to be living at home and I don't have a lot of expenses. But the fact that I don't have work is really is something that really bothers me. Because I like being productive, and without a deadline, I don't think I work very well. So.
You know, it's interesting. And Doc, before you come in, I just want to say something. Surya said that this pandemic affects everyone. It does. And I want you to know that, you know, there are certain members from our judiciary, sitting judges, who also had children who were stuck overseas during this pandemic. And they were still sitting through court every day, worrying about the well-being of their children overseas. Of course, it's a different and there's a matter of degree. You know, some senior lawyers have had problems, but I really want to hear your views, Doc, on you know, some of what Surya articulated. The objective here, and which is why I had requested all for slightly longer time. The objective here is not just to have a conversation, which is only the first step, but the objective here is to have practical advice. I'd like to share that both the Delhi High Court Bar Association and the Supreme Court Bar Association are working towards setting up helplines. I know you have some helpline and counseling facilities that you are going to recommend to us. Bar and Bench will very graciously follow up, but just tell us, picking up from Surya and the stories on what needs to be done. What are we confronted with in this internet age today?
What we're confronted with is an extraordinary situation. The uncertainty. I mean, yes, we're all talking about social isolation, anxiety, despair. The uncertainty actually makes you feel quite hopeless, and you feel as if you have no control. And anytime when you don't have control, that actually gives rise to everything that we're talking about: anxiety, depression, panic attack. At the bottom of it is actually the sense of lack of control. So if you're really looking at what to do with it, I think, you know, we need to look at interventions which make us feel as if we are in control, and quite genuinely, authentically so. So we can really look at things that we have control over. For example, your day. You know, simple things like having a routine, having a good sleep hygiene. What happened to people was they were sleeping at any order, waking at any order, eating at any order. And what it does is slowly you feel as if, you know, your life is just slipping through your hands. You have no control. So even if you do things like having a routine, a basic regime, we all know about yoga, meditation, exercise. I think everybody knows about that. But even things like meal times, bathing times, sleep hygiene, if we have regulated times for that, that's a very big step. The second step is, you know, the kind of language we use. Everybody starts talking about it. One, the news consumption. I think if we limit that, because if you're constantly, you know, updating how many and what the numbers are and so on and so forth, it just makes you more anxious. What the pandemic has done is it's made people generally anxious, and people who were mildly anxious, their problems have gone into moderate and extreme anxiety. And the same thing for depression, which is the reason why high-risk behavior and suicides have gone up, right? So yes, the problem is real. We don't know when it ends. And the impact is going to remain for months to years, so says the research. But as we go along, we'll know. The fear of the contagion, the fact that we don't have an answer to it, that just adds. So if you really see these things, your anxiety is going to go up. But if you do things like, use very positive language, like reframe, instead of catastrophizing, instead of saying, I'm stuck at home with my family, if we reframe it and say, I'm safe at home with my family, what it does to your brain is different. The neurochemicals secreted are different when we use the language in different ways. So one of the simple ways is if somebody is using very catastrophic language, it is doomsday, and like words like that actually make you feel, they have a visceral response and a neurochemical response in your body. But if you flip it, or you get into gratitude, like, oh, I'm safe, I have my family, roof over my head, food on the table, etc., etc. People around me, people who love me. And if you can't go meet people physically, virtually connect with people. Now, gratitude is known to secrete neurochemicals which actually impact the prefrontal cortex of our brain, which is responsible for all these negative emotions of guilt, shame, etc., etc., etc. So doing these little things, we are actually at a brain level, at a neurochemical level, impacting ourselves. And there's a very cute law which I want to leave you with. It's called Hebb's law. Neurons that fire together wire together. Our behavior is regulated by the wiring of the neurons, and they fire together when you keep doing a certain behavior period over and over again. That's how habits are formed. So if you have, nice, good reframed language of gratitude every day, so you feel abundance, and then you multiply that abundance, because the neurons are wiring. You're not hardwired. You're actually neuroplastic. So you change that. So in these times of adversity, the gift we have is resilience. That rubber ball, the harder you throw on the ground, the higher it comes. We're all resilient people. Surya's story just tells us that, look at Surya, look at Gaurav. They, in true sense, are not just surviving, but thriving. Thriving because they're here. They have the courage to share the story. And when you share the story and you reframe it, you restory your story. And when you restory your story, you restore your faith, your trust, your hope. And that's actually what we need to really work on. Very simple things to really reframe, restory, and restore your faith, your hope, because you all are bright people. Look at the number of years. Look at the entrance exams you gave. You worked hard 5 years in your college days, if you did after 12. Then all these years of working. I mean, it has to show result. It has to. And I know my dad used to say, this too shall pass. And I just would get very annoyed as to why does he say that? And now I understand what it means. And I'm sure you all have more to share. I want to stop here because I want to hear other voices.
Thank you. And, that's very interesting. You just talked about neuroplasticity. I remember reading a few years ago, there was a Canadian economist who became a psychiatrist. His name is Norman Deutsch. And he is the man who won the Nobel Prize for neuroplasticity and wrote a book about it called The Brain That Heals Itself and the Brain That Rewires. And he also used the word resilience. So I wanted to ask the Honorable Judge, sir, resilience is something that we hear a lot about even within the legal profession. You argue a case, you come out, it doesn't matter whether you win or lose, you've got to get back on your feet, you've got to be prepared, resilience. But, based on your own journey and based on what you're hearing some of these young lawyers talk about, given the current situation, Gaurav had an economic challenge of 12,000 rupees in contrast to Surya, who says she's privileged to not have to bear those expenses. But what is the practical advice that you would give? And the reason I also say this, sir, is a lot of youngsters were very badly affected after the Sushant Rajput incident. It has nothing to do with law, but here was a man who had everything going for himself. And that's really started a dialogue. And, Surya talked about the fact that the legal profession, and there's the Vidhi Center for Policy Research, has data that says that an average lawyer in the first 2 years makes no more than 15 to 20,000 rupees. So how do you build that resilience, sir? That first phase of Justice Hidayatullah, the first two phases, how do you build that resilience?
According to me, the resilience has to be built up by close association with your peers, by close association with your family, and very, very close association with the people who are in the profession. In fact, the best part of this profession is the interaction that you have with your colleagues. You know, they are your best friends, and you can share everything with them. Today, I think a young lawyer would be spending about 80% of their productive time with their colleagues. You know, it's whether it's on a coffee table, whether it's in the chamber, whether it's discussing law, they're all together. So that is there, but I want to add something more to resilience.
Please.
And I think these sort of challenges which arise in a life mean that a person has to reinvent himself also. You have to prepare for life post this pandemic. After this pandemic is over, in my view, life will not be the same. For instance, those who are practicing, say, on the criminal side and doing only check bouncing cases, we are not sure how many of them will have enough work. They may have to reinvent themselves. Whether people will be filing IPR suits in dozens as they used to do previously, I am not so sanguine. One will have to reinvent oneself. For instance, speaking for myself, I learned about IPR and income tax pretty late in my career because I wanted to reinvent myself, and I felt that was a sunrise area at some point of time. So one will have to find out which is that sunrise area which is going to be there after the pandemic. And you have to start working in that area, start doing research in that area. And as the doctor said, there are small pleasures of life which cost nothing. It's the language that you use. It's going for a walk. It's just reading a book that you have not read, which you wanted to read for a very long time. Follow your passion. And use this pause in life to upgrade your skill, your talent. Channelize it by thinking about creating some other revenue stream. For instance, you mentioned, Satvik, that you started ensuring that a Zoom call takes place. You organized this webinar. This webinar has, as a concept, has grown during this period of pandemic only. So every downside or every challenge that you face in life also gives you an opportunity. So all challenges have not to be viewed negatively. They have to be viewed as opportunities. And you have to adapt to the new circumstances which will emerge after this pandemic is over. So it requires a lot of rethinking, but with a discipline. Because if you lose discipline, as the doctor rightly observed, you will not come out of this pandemic. You need to survive, and the only way to survive is by maintaining a certain amount of discipline in life, like eating on time, sleeping on time, having the physical fitness. Because if you are not physically fit, even if you get the boom time, how will you make use of that boom? And I'm telling you, boom time will not be far. In my view, whenever there is darkness, dawn is never far away. It may come slowly. It may not be a clear dawn to begin with. Recovery may not take place as a V. It may come as a U, or it may come in a different form. But recovery will always come. It will come in a few years' time. And what are we going to do to utilize that boom? I think we have to really work for that. It should not happen that we hit the boom phase and we are not able to make use of it. It requires a bit of adaptation, a bit of reinvention. That must be done.
So, and of course, you said you readapted yourself and developed a practice in tax, and then we all know that you argued the famous Gujarat Ambuja sales tax case, at the height of your career. But on a lighter note, have you resumed your passion and interest in cycling that you used to do, or is that
Well, I plan to go cycling tomorrow morning.
But you know, it's very interesting, sir. Thank you for that. गौरव, मैं आप पे आना चाहता था. आपने सुना होगा जज साहब को, अमीर जज साहब ने कहा कि इस महामारी के कारण हम सबको नई नई तरकीबें और नई नई स्किल्स डेवलप करनी पड़ेंगी. जो अमूमन 138 के चेक बाउंसिंग के केसेस करते थे, उन लोगों को अब एक नई स्किल एक्वायर करनी पड़ेगी. तो क्या आपने इस विषय पे कुछ सोच विचार किया है? क्योंकि आपने मुझसे ये जाहिर किया था कि इस वक्त आप बिजनौर में हैं, परंतु शीघ्र ही जैसे ही आपको कुछ भी क्लैरिटी मिलेगी, आप दिल्ली वापस आना चाहेंगे और अपनी प्रैक्टिस यहाँ रिज्यूम करना चाहेंगे. तो क्या आपने इस पे कुछ ध्यान और खोज किया है कि आप इस महामारी के बाद किन विषयों में प्रैक्टिस कर सकते हैं और जो पुरानी आपकी प्रैक्टिस थी उसमें आप बदलाव कैसे ला सकते हैं, गौरव?
सर बिल्कुल सर, सर ने ठीक बोला कि वो जो रिलीजियस चेक बाउंस केस एंड मैट्रिमोनियल केसेस आर नॉट इनफ टू प्रैक्टिस. आई एम डीलिंग विद अदर केसेस आल्सो एट टाइम, बट यू नो क्रिमिनल केसेस को मैं थोड़ा सा ज़्यादा प्रेफर कर रहा था उस दौरान, और ये सब चेक बाउंस और ये मैट्रिमोनियल केसेस को. लेकिन अभी थोड़ा सा सिविल साइड पे और टैक्स साइड पे भी मेरा फोकस है, उसको कोशिश कर रहा हूँ करने की. तो उस स्ट्रीम के एक्ट्स को मैं अभी थोड़ा सा स्टडी भी इस दौरान थोड़ा कर रहा हूँ. और अभी थोड़ा सा लीगल प्रोफेशनल में और उसका जो पहला एक सेट फॉर्मेट था उसमें थोड़ा चेंज आने वाला है फ्यूचर में, जैसे सर बोल रहे थे. तो उसके लिए भी मैं प्लानिंग कर रहा हूँ. जैसे ऑनलाइन थोड़ा सा चल रहा है इस समय, ऑनलाइन हेयरिंग वगैरह केसेस की हो रही हैं और सारी चीज़ें. तो मुझे लगता है इन फ्यूचर वो सारी चीज़ें और आगे एक्सटेंड ही होने वाली हैं, और आगे वो थोड़ा सा इस चीज़ का आने वाला है कि फ्यूचर में ऑनलाइन हम प्रैक्टिस किया करें या ऐसा कुछ होगा. जो इज इट जस्ट पॉसिबल इन फ्यूचर. तो उसके लिए भी वो सब जो भी स्टडी है वो मैं आई एम डूइंग दैट. सर आई एम नॉट हियरिंग.
Unmute, Satvik.
सॉरी. एक आपको सुनते हुए बहुत अच्छा प्रश्न आया और मैं अभी उचित समय समझ के इसको आप पे रखूंगा, क्योंकि बात के लिए मैं ये एक डायलॉग बनाना चाहता हूँ. सवाल ये उठा कि क्या जो छोटे यंग लॉयर्स हैं जिनको इस महामारी के कारण सेटबैक पहुंचा है, एक प्रश्न आया था कि क्या अब यंगस्टर्स जुडिशियल सर्विसेज के एग्जाम्स के लिए तैयारी करें. तो क्या कभी आपका भी ये फोकस हटा है 4 साल ये करके कि अब मैं एक स्टेबिलिटी चाहता हूं, और क्या आपने कभी इस पे सोच विचार किया है कि अब मैं जुडिशियल सर्विसेज की तरफ जाऊंगा और अपनी प्रैक्टिस को होल्ड पे रखूंगा? क्या ऐसे विचार आपके भी जहन में आए हैं?
नो सर, आई नेवर थिंक इन दैट वे. मैं प्रैक्टिस में ही अपने आप को करना चाहता हूँ स्टेबल, इसलिए आई एम नॉट लूजिंग माई फोकस फ्रॉम हियर. तो इट्स
वेरी
माई
गुड.
cup of tea to doing litigation and going court and this all. I love this profession.
So you're a quick learner. That's exactly what Justice Manmohan said. You have to stay at it, and you're a quick learner by saying that you'd like to stay at it. Surya, do you think that at this time, had you not been on a sabbatical, would your challenges be easier? You had mentioned to me that some of the not so good things about the pandemic has been that you sometimes struggle with your own medication, and you are now going about and playing with your cycle. If you won't kill me after this, you told me that for 2 days before this webinar you had been sleeping a lot more on time and not your usual 5 a.m. 6 a.m. So you at one level know what you need to be doing, Surya, and at another level you're not able to. So I'm curious to hear your thoughts, and then have Dr. Arvinder give us advice that what is it that even when you know what you need to do, what is that advice that you have for your fellow colleagues and younger members of the bar who are going through these challenges? Tell us. You know that you've sought help. You know that you've gone to a psychologist and a psychotherapist, and yet you know that you need that medication, and yet you don't sometimes take it, Surya. Tell me about the how, why. Give me an insight.
So it's like Dr. Singh said, it's about not having control. When there is no, I mean, for me right now, because there is no end in sight to when are the courts going to reopen, when are we going to start working again, and there is no end in sight. So for me, I mean, it's a very personal thing in that my brain is trying to convince me into believing that trying to get better right now will not really help because there is no end. So maybe you just fall back. So it's better to just wait till it gets a little better to try. I mean, I wasn't really thinking about this. So this is the first thing that has come to my mind when you asked me this question. Might not be very refined, but yes. So it is not that I don't know what I need to do to get better because I've had help already, and that has helped me to realize what I need to do. But I can't always find the motivation to keep doing that. It's like with medication, it's not like I wasn't taking it. I was taking it continuously, and I missed it a couple of days because my cycle was fluctuating and I was sleeping late. So I missed it, and then I just didn't take it. I never bought it again. So it's about motivation, and I really cannot say anything uh, to anyone. I mean, what they can do to get better because I'm still trying to figure that out. So maybe Dr. Singh.
Maybe the doctor can. Doctor,
Yeah.
what do you think? Dr. Arvinder, you know, you work for 25 years, you have these helplines. I think the legal fraternity at this time is really going through a very, very hard phase. I think we've had challenges all throughout, but you know, we have a crisis bigger than a pandemic that's facing us, if I may dare say. Where do these youngsters get motivation? How do they build this resilience? How can we keep them upbeat? How can a person say that, okay, I'm going to assume control knowing that there's uncertainty? You know, those of who, you know, sometimes know me know that I like reading astrology blogs. So if I read an astrological blog just out of my lightness of heart to see how accurate they are, you know, everyone is saying September, October, November, but you know, that's, I don't want to take away from the seriousness of this discussion. Where do we find this? We need help. The legal fraternity, the youngsters need help. What advice would you have for the leaders of our bar association, for our bar and our bench, our honorable judges and the members of the fraternity? Guide us here, please.
So the leaders, so it's a brilliant question, Satvik. Thanks for asking. The leaders have a very big role here because as leaders, see, when everybody, what Surya shared was from a space of, each one of us has a parent, a child, and an adult space in us. It's the scared child space. There's no, I can't see the light at the end of the tunnel, uncertainty. Why get up? If there's nothing to look forward to, let's just, and in any case, when the stress levels are very high, fight or flight. So some of the times it's fight, flight, or freeze, so we just engage in that. So the senior people who have the wisdom, who also have, they're like the parents, they're like the nurturing parents. So if you took on the nurturing parent role, which means mentoring them, spending time, just the wonderful, wise words that Justice Manmohan said, like, use this time to prepare. If you just sat with anybody, if you had like we have office hours, where people, our students just walk in and talk to us. If you created those mentoring hours, those office hours, I mean, these young lawyers are probably clamoring to have one-on-one time with you. Your 10 minutes will be so valuable in actually making them feel important, acknowledged, because what's happening right now, they're feeling worthless. Anybody who doesn't have a day to look forward to will feel worthless. So as far as the leaders are concerned, do anything that you can do to make the younger people feel worthwhile. Be mentors, have officers, have little, open up your spaces, for a little lunch or a tea for 10 or 15 or 20 young lawyers who just come and spend some time, and they see you, they hear your stories of struggle, and they say, well, if he struggled or she struggled and is here, so can I. What are the tips that What did you do? Like the tip, like, listen, upgrade your skills, change your game, do something new, go cycling. And even this little thing that you said in just, well, tomorrow morning I'm going cycling. I'm sure it's inspired people to say, hey, he can do it, so can I. So that's a big one. For the people, for the youngsters, look, you all are surviving, thriving, you all are very resilient people. Because nobody, all of us sitting here, have not seen this pandemic situation, this extraordinary situation like you have at your age. So clearly you have something in you. You have to believe that. And how do you believe that? Because look, all these grim images will come in your head. Again, our brain thinks in images. If I tell you don't eat a chocolate, your brain only saw a chocolate. The image of a chocolate came, you tasted it in your mouth. Don't, there's no image. So if you keep thinking of, don't think negative, don't see, there is no light at the end of the tunnel, there is no light. Okay, there's darkness. There's, if you catastrophize, that's what happens. When you say that, this is a very short period, this too shall pass, let me see what can I do. If I'm feeling miserable on a scale of 0 to 10, where 10 is most miserable, I'm feeling like 9.5, what can I do to come from 9.5 to 9? Don't think of coming to 1 or 0. Just that one little thing that'll cheer my day. And another thing I want to flag is focus not just on individual well-being but also collective well-being. Have you seen how many people have rallied together to start helping the migrant labor, to doing things, to langars, to what have you? So when you start working or helping someone else, your own pain reduces, right? So it's not like it disappears. But the thing is that if I have to make this smaller without breaking it, I mean, the only other way I can do this is probably, put something bigger, something bigger next to it. So this automatically became smaller. This bigger thing is, gratitude, helping other people, building on your strengths, learning something new. It just doesn't have to be in the field of law. Go learn a language. Duolingo is there. Go learn a few words of a language, dance, music, anything that you want to do. So anything that you do different, you help your brain form new connections. And when there are new connections, happy hormones, endorphins are released, and you feel calmer and happier. That's the control you definitely have. So the leaders, please go ahead and give some precious time of yourself and some nice.
Interesting. Thank you for that. And you'd be happy to learn, and I'm happy to share on this webinar that many of my colleagues, and sir, you'll be also happy to hear, many of my colleagues and friends within the profession, when I reached out to them to talk about the urgent need to have a webinar of this sorts and to really engage the legal fraternity and address the challenges, have already come forward to set up a kind of a mentor-mentee program where people can pick up and call up, so to say, successful lawyer and seek guidance and seek everyday tips. So Doc, that's been really helpful. And before I move for final comments, Doc, I wanted to ask you also, what are some of the community helplines? I know you'd sent me now may be a good time, but
Yes.
if you could please share with us, some of these, and I'll use an analogy. Domestic violence cases have increased during the time of the pandemic, and in the last 10 years, domestic violence has been on an upward slide, or rather an upward growth. And what a lot of people, a lot of battered women, if I may use that word, they got help from online resources. My request to you is to please share today with all of the viewers watching and streaming this live on the Bar and Bench YouTube channel is what is the recourse that a Surya or a Gaurav can utilize in utmost confidence and secrecy if they are feeling despondent? What can we do in the memory of those 4 colleagues at the bar who I, by the way, didn't know, who've gone? What could they have done? Who could they have reached out to? Can you please elaborate on that and give us some practical tips?
Very quickly. First, if somebody's talking about despair, do not brush them aside. So listen to it. Okay, listen to their story. Secondly, there are lots of helplines where, there is a time where each one of us has a time where we are despondent, we are sad, we want to talk to someone. We're feeling very suicidal, perhaps. We are ideating about it. We are having a death wish or something. I wish this ends. I don't want to live. Just talk to someone. It could be a close friend or it could be a helpline. There are organizations like Samaritans, like Sanjeevani, like TIS has a helpline, like ASRA. Satvik, this would be a good time to flash that slide. Yeah. So people can take pictures. To talk to someone, pick up the phone, because talking to someone actually at that point, just talking for 5 minutes in confidence, where you don't know, nobody can see you, nobody knows who you are. These are confidential helplines. Just actually, when that moment passes, the crisis passes. So if you are feeling very, very vulnerable, don't hesitate. Pick the phone, call up. Somebody at the other end will be a trained professional who will listen to your story, who may not have direct solutions, but who will understand your pain. And when in pain, I think that's what we need the most. Somebody who understands what I'm saying. So, please, you can use any of these resources, like this resources, also like email-based counseling, chat-based counseling, because, these days when we are in cramped spaces, everybody's there. We don't have the privacy of talking to someone on phone. So we also have chat services. We have email-based counseling. So reach out for help. So these are the resources that are available. The bottom line is, it's okay to feel sad, depressed, low, angry, frustrated, but it's not okay to stay that for long periods of time. If it's a day like that, fine. But if for 2 weeks you've been insomniac, not eating properly, it's time to seek help. And tell yourself it's okay to seek help, and tell the others around you. Be the advocates. Advocacy is your goal. Advocacy of mental health. It's not really it's not limited to professionals. Each one of you can actually be one of these resources as well. As good a resource as these are, because all it needs is a careful listening and referring. I don't want to minimize the work that we as professionals do, but the first aid, the emotional first aid, is something that anybody can provide. So these are the helplines. Reach out for help, listen to the story, don't dismiss anyone's story. And if you find any sign of any of these, just talk to them, refer them.
Thank you. I'm going to stop sharing that screen, and that was really helpful. I will also request the team at Bar and Bench that has been extremely helpful and supportive in putting together the first of this kind, to share those details on their website and on their social media pages. I'm cognizant of the time, and I want to keep it within time. I wanted to just do a quick round of last parting thoughts. Sir, what are your parting thoughts? We know that this too shall pass, but for someone like Gaurav, who's in Bijnor and who wonders, when will this pass? What are your parting thoughts? And then we can just do a quick word of thanks that my colleague Tanveer Oberoi will render, sir.
Sunil Gavaskar, when he was a commentator, would always say that whenever the batsman used to get out on a loose ball, he would say, it's all in the mind, right? So I think during this pandemic, one must engage himself or herself in some productive work. It may not be legal work, as the doctor said. It could be anything. It could be your passion. For instance, I have a passion for traveling to Africa. And it's a good time to research on that, which country to visit and see where are the passes which are available and all. Maybe you don't visit for next 2-3 years, but it's a good time to follow your passion. No harm in that. So this phase is a short phase. Let's take it that this will not last forever, but one will have to adapt oneself for the boom time. Please do that. Use this pause in your life to get some more skills. And in the end, I would only like to tell Satvik that I am very happy that you organized this webinar, The most precious light is the one that visits you in the darkest hour. And I think this is what you have done. And I'm very happy that the doctor has given some very good advice. And I hope everyone uses it and it is used for general good of the society, and particularly Gaurav's good health and Surya's good health. And hope they join back in the profession. Let me tell these youngsters that according to an Israeli scholar who's written the latest number of books, Yuval, and he believes that today when you marry, you better choose your spouse very well, because you're going to be living with him or her for next 125 years. Lifespan is going to increase. So life is going to be very long, and one is going to be in this profession for a very, very long time. 9 or 10 months in the profession, even if you have not worked, really doesn't matter if you're going to work for about 60 years in this profession. So it's a long phase. Prepare for that phase. Enjoy it. This low phase, you will remember. It may give you some grit. That's what is required.
Thank you very much, sir. That's really very helpful to know. There's been forwards all morning today. You promised your spouse that you'll spend time with him or her 24/7. Then today is the day, because it's the 24th of July. So, but Gaurav, आप हमारे दर्शकों को अपने जो मित्रगण हैं, जो आपके दोस्त यार हैं फ्रेटर्निटी में, आप अपने एक्सपीरियंस से और आज की इस बातचीत के बाद क्या कहना चाहेंगे? आपने जज साहब की बात सुनी कि हमें अब नए नए प्रकार का काम सीखना पड़ेगा और नई दिशा में अपना काम चालू करना पड़ेगा. आप इससे क्या प्रोत्साहन लेते हैं और आप आगे क्या अपने दिमाग में रख रहे हैं वापस आने का, और आपकी क्या व्यूज हैं?
First of all, I want to say that I really feel charged after hearing all your guys. So I am feeling very well and charged this time after hearing you all. So sir, बस I want to say to my friends that के अभी सर जो भी उसमें दूसरे हमारे अपॉर्चुनिटीज़ हैं हमारे प्रोफेशन में, अपार्ट फ्रॉम दैट सिंगल स्ट्रीम, दूसरे भी जो भी अपॉर्चुनिटीज़ हैं, तो उसको वो एक्सप्लोर करें और नए नए जितने भी हमारे स्पेसेस हैं हमारे इस प्रोफेशन में, वो सबको एक्सप्लोर करें और धीरे धीरे सब तरफ से अपने आप को सिक्योर करके और आगे चलें. बस इतना ही.
Thank you. Surya, you've had your what should I say, set of challenges. The least of all was when you were evicted from Lajpat Nagar for holding out a banner. It's been a difficult phase. It's been a difficult phase for all of us. Some of us are now sick and tired of baking sourdough bread and want to really see the dough, right? But what are your views? What are your parting thoughts? What are your parting thoughts to your colleagues? If you would allow me the luxury, what are your thoughts to fellow lawyers who are struggling, who are going through mental health issues and are feeling torn? What would be your parting thoughts? And I have some for you, but I'll save them for later. What are your views? And then I'd like to end with the doctor well within time to really give the last words.
So, like from what I've said, for me, it was very clear to identify the signs of anxiety or depression, because these were related to a specific trigger, and it's not like it came out of nowhere, but it can come out of nowhere. And in those situations, it can be difficult to recognize those patterns. So, which is why I would advise everyone, and not just people who think they might be going through something, but everyone to actually read up on mental health. Because the more you read about it, and which it's true in my case, because I realized that there is no need for stigma, because it is purely a scientific, there is a scientific basis for you feeling the way that you do. And once you realize that stigma just vanishes from your mind, and that's all that matters. Because after that, it was very easy for me to go and seek help. And I'm a very outgoing person. I have a lot of friends, and I would talk to them as well, but it's not the same as talking. Yes, it helps, and to a certain degree, it might even be exactly what you need. But for someone who has progressed beyond that, there is no shame in asking for help. And it is just going to a psychologist, be open with them like I was. I was always wary of medicines, and I was very open with my psychologist. I told her that I don't want to take medication. And so we did sessions for 3-4 months, and later she recommended medication, and then I was okay with it because I knew that she wasn't rushing into giving me medication. um, but apart from that, just because I took a few notes, so as far as the profession is concerned, so one of the major points that we've discussed is that others have to be willing to listen. And this listening is not just like, I mean, please don't. I think you diminish the value of you listening when you try to one up the other person by telling them the bigger struggles that you faced, which is true, and it is not to take away from your struggles at all. But when somebody is confiding in you or telling you that I have a problem, they really don't want you to tell them that your feelings are not valid, or because you face something much bigger. So there is that. And I think in the legal profession in general, we have the tendency to glorify struggle because we see so much of it. We have to get some sort of happiness, so we tell other people and tell them that, oh, we overcame this. But I think that really takes a toll on someone who has to listen to it and who's going through their own struggles but thinks that they're not really something to be looked at. And the last thing, like Justice Manmohan mentioned, the Act, the Mental Health Act, and it says that the environment must be made conducive. And I think we have to think about how we can make the environment conducive in the legal profession. And in that, I mean, obviously there are multiple stakeholders. The bar associations can take steps to maybe ensure that there is a counselor or a list of counselors that lawyers can reach out to with complete confidentiality. And there is also the issue of, the monetary aspect. But I mean, these are all things that can be looked at. So, yes.
Thank you. I really liked your word, and I know we're running a couple of minutes over, so please grant me that time. But I like what you said. There is no shame in asking for help. Dr. Arvinder, how would you like to pick up on that and your parting thoughts? I really want our viewers and listeners to hear from a doctor, a professional trained person. As I explained to the Honorable Judge, if after this session we can save just one person and help even one person, then the time that each one of you have taken out, which I'm eternally grateful for, will be valuable. So the floor is yours, and then I'm going to pass the baton on to my colleague to do the word of thanks.
So I'm very tempted to quote Rumi because I love Rumi. So it's it just sort of summarizes what we're talking about. There's one of the quotations that Rumi has, which is very valuable, which says, "Yesterday I was clever, so I wanted to change the world. Today I'm wise, so I'm changing myself." So it's really what I want to say is that, I mean, Surya, thank you so much. Thank you for that extraordinary story of yours, and for putting it so beautifully, all the concepts. I mean, this has been the best psychoeducation coming from your mouth on no stigma, no shame, it's okay, and how it helped you. And what I loved was with great ease how you talked about, yes, I missed medication because of my, sleep cycles going haywire, but I'm not irresponsible. I took it back. So, it is one of the things we see is let's not judge anything. Simple acts like routine, simple acts like do whatever it takes for you to have control. Your day is very much in your control. Gratitude, if you start looking, you'll have plenty of things to have gratitude for. And with gratitude, you're actually, you're stimulating your good parts of the brain. So do yourself a service, so do that. The fact that when you help someone else, there's again, the gratification helps you deal with some of the anxiety and pain that you're having. Very, very, and most of all, I find that the words we use for ourselves, the catastrophizing has to be reframed. Remember, we are all very capable of taking care of ourselves. We are resilient human beings. And the journey, our journey is actually to be in touch with that resilience and keep tapping on that resilience. So do whatever it takes and tap on that beautiful resilience that you have. Acknowledge the emotions. You're feeling sad, mad, glad, irritated. Please acknowledge there's nothing wrong with it. Once you acknowledge, accept that I'm feeling like that. It's just a feeling. It's not you. It's a feeling. Accept that, and then you'll have, what do I want to do? The change in the attitude will come. What Rumi is talking about. So I will stop here because I'm mindful of the time.
Yeah. Tanvir, it's all yours.
Thank you very much. I'd like to thank all the panelists for a very enriching, very illuminating presentation and talk. It's definitely shed light and hopefully shed light where there's been darkness for a lot of people, especially given these last few months. I'd like to thank Justice Manmohan for taking time out of his very busy day. I'd like to give a sincere round of thanks to Dr. Arvinder Singh, who is the founder, director of the Shoka Center for Wellbeing. Our sincerest thanks to Ms. Surya Rajappan and Gaurav Kumar to come here today and open up and share with us about themselves. Thanks goes also to Manya Education for its support in facilitating this talk, along with Pallavi Saluja and Bar and Bench for providing and partnering for this talk. The helplines will be going up on Bar and Bench later as available, so you can check back there later. And last but certainly not the least, thank you to Mr. Satvik Varma for organizing this and helping us youngsters in the profession also know that this too shall pass. Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you, Satvik, for organizing this.
Thank you very much. Thank you.
Thank you, Satvik. Thank you. Thank you, Doctor.
Thank you very much. Thank you.